So without further ado, I will turn it over to Aubrey, Steve, and Ted. Thanks again so much for joining us today.
Thank you. All right, see if we can share the screen. All right. And can you see the screen?
Looks
I can hear. Yep.
All right, perfect. Well, I'll hand it over to Ted since he'll be starting this for us.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'm Ted Deers. I'm Assistant Director of the Water Division at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I've been associated with this program for a decade and a half or so. And it's my pleasure to be able to give the sort of historical perspective. Next slide. There we go. Since I've been around the state for so long, this is the part where they say, hey, Grandpa, tell us a story. So I'm going to tell the story of how we got here and then turn it over to the other speakers to talk about where we're at today and where we're headed. Next slide, please. Obviously, this is what you all deal with on a daily basis. I'm going to talk about some of these generally, but I'm going to focus a little on tourism as we talk about kind of where we got into this whole salt thing. But certainly, you'll see some of this referenced in our slides as to how we got to this point. Slide, please. So in 2004 or so, the early 2000s, our New Hampshire Department of Transportation made a proposal that they needed to expand the highway. This is the section between Manchester, which is our largest city, and the Massachusetts border going south. So the idea was basically they're going to double the size of the highway from 2 lanes each wide to 4 lanes. It's going to have all the accoutrement that goes with those lanes, the bigger ramps, park and rides, lots of drainage. I would note this point about drainage in that until this project went on, that this highway that was built in the 60s, part of the Eisenhower, 5-star interstate highway system, it had open draining, which means that the water that just came off the highway was generally just off to the side of the highway, into swales, into the ground. There weren't it was not a closed system that had, storm drains, pipes, all of that other stuff. That makes a difference. I'm going to talk about that just a little bit about salt. And of course, obviously more lanes, more salt. Next slide, please. So as we started looking at this project, it's a part that is by far the most highly densely developed part of our state. And so began to look at some of the things that were going on there, the water quality. We have a long history of water quality sampling. And DEPA also got involved in this as part of this large project and began collecting samples and finding chloride in chloride violations in these 4 small watersheds here along the I-93 corridor. Next. And I just point out, this is for the Wisconsinites out there, that the state runs the liquor stores. And so if you look at kind of the importance, and it funds a lot of our programs in the state, your typical sin tax. If you look at all the people from Boston, this is a very large metropolitan area. It dwarfs the entire state of New Hampshire. And we have ski areas to the north, and we have Lake Winnipesaukee and our lakes region in the middle. And we depend on the revenue that comes up this interstate. And I think you can see by just the density of liquor stores how important this is for us to be able to harvest those Massachusetts dollars as they come north. Not unlike the good folks who live in Door County and their relationship with the greater Chi-town. Next. So I just point this out is that this is really what got us going in this. We began to have specific conductivity meters deployed for long periods of time in these small watersheds and began to see very, very high levels of chlorides. This is, again, if you translate or if you do a regression of chlorides to specific conductivity, which we have done over the years on these watersheds as well as for the state, we found this to be a very, very accurate way of looking at that translation between specific conductivity and chloride. And we have very high levels under certain circumstances in these areas. Next slide, please. As a result of that, we began working on a maximum daily load limit. So this is a TMDL. It's typical of how TMDLs are done. We basically looked at how Minnesota has done it, and we based it on looking at the sort of flows exceedance calculations. The thing I want to point out about this that's particularly important is that if you look at the little dots there, blue is summer and black is winter. And what you actually see is that the highest levels of chlorides, the highest concentrations occur in the summer. This gets back to that drainage situation where all of the highway runoff goes into the ground. That ground becomes highly saline. And so we have very high chloride levels that sit within the groundwater. And you see those, especially in the summer when you're down to base flow. And so this is an important phenomena that it guides us a little bit in that this is a problem that isn't just using more salt today. This is a problem that's going to be haunting us for quite a while. Next slide, please. We also see these impacts across the state, and we'll come back to this in a little bit, I think, but we're starting to see some of these areas that Hobbit's Pond, which is that red, which is in the middle, the sort of peach colored on my screen, squares in the middle with that large, much higher levels. Hobbit's Pond is where one of the interchanges, exit 3 on Interstate 93, drains. It drains directly pretty much into that pond. And you can see that over the course of time, and we have a very active volunteer monitoring effort out there. They've been looking at these chloride levels over time, or conductivity levels, which you can translate to chloride, that these conductivity levels have really doubled. And so it's not just that they've doubled there, but if you look at Lake Sunapee, which is a much, much larger lake, north, not in a highly developed area, not highly developed at all, it's a tourist area, and you see, again, this increase, and it's essentially a doubling of the specific conductivity over the last 30 years. This is pretty scary stuff. We are kind of permanently changing some of these waterways. Next. And again, you see more of the same over 30-year, 20-year period. You're seeing groundwater also showing these signs, although very low in terms of concentrations, these doubling, sometimes tripling of chlorides. Next, please. So that TMDL, we came up with allocations, what needed to be reduced in order to meet water quality standards. And I just want to point out here that while this whole project started because of DOT, when you actually look, if you look at the red circle there, the amount of salt use that's actually in municipal and private roads vastly dwarfs that which comes from the DOT. It's a small portion. This raised a lot of interest because only of all of these entities, only DOT had a permit. Only DOT was getting a 401 certification on their wetlands impacts. The municipalities and the private sector were not. And so this raises a lot of interesting policy questions, which is why we got into, again, some of this salt business. Next. And I just point this out, this is similar to what we saw before, is that we're seeing this everywhere. We are seeing this increasing trend, although still very low in most areas, but we are seeing this chloride concentration increasing, which has, again, interesting implications. Next. And it's not just one part of the state, it's all over the state. And, it's kind of scary because you expect this in the more developed areas, but we're seeing it everywhere, which also means that why this program is starting to expand beyond just those 4 or 5 towns, which are along I-93. As we started looking at this, it's clear that this is a statewide issue. Next. As part of that TMDL process, we looked at where is the salt coming from? So in order to be able to do this allocation. And as we went through, and this is sort of a mass balance approach to coming up with this, we identified that really the vast majority are coming from municipal roads, but especially parking lots. And so parking lots are private. They're not regulated by the state. They're not regulated by the municipalities, really, although we can talk about MS4 more later if that comes up. But certainly this parking lot issue, which really drove us towards what are we going to do about the private sector and how are we going to get at those folks? Next slide, please. This is where the Green SnowPro came in. Where we really started with this was by stealing Minnesota's training program that they had developed and starting to implement that for volunteer training. So similar to the way Minnesota does it, we offered it to people. We had trainers. We worked with our UNH, the technical training center there, to be able to look to get road agents in, to get municipal staff in. We began to do this training effort. And what we heard over and over again as part of that process was that the people who were interested in it and the people who were going through the training really wanted to reduce their salt use. But they were really, really worried about liability. And not surprising, obviously, it's a litigious society. There's lots of attorneys out there. In your area, Google slip and fall attorneys. You'll get, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of returns on Google. So we looked at that issue and thought, well, how could you actually address it? Next slide, please. So where this program really came around was how do we create a situation in which people have some liability protection? And Steve's going to talk more about that and why and the way that this was formed. But I will just say that getting this legislation formed and through, and I really feel for you all in your states, Minnesota, who are trying to get this through your legislatures. Just pointing out that it's very challenging because it really does, it has forces against it on both sides. And maybe Steve can talk more about this as well, but if you happen to be on the left side of the aisle, you don't like it because it's tort reform. If you happen to be on the right side of the aisle, you don't like it because the government's in your pocket. So the forces against this are really challenging, which is why coalitions, such as the folks who carried around their silver spoons around the Minnesota, legislature are really important. Getting that coalition together, because the point of all of this is that we improve efficiency in the system. I mean, that's why SIMA has been all over this. That's why the industry is really interested in it, is improving their efficiency, which reduces their costs. Keeping public safety at least the same, if not improving it. Improving our documentation in case you are ever sued. Obviously, for DES's perspective, the reason why we're in this has to do with none of the things above. It really is about the environmental quality. But the whole point is, can we find a way to really improve and reduce the liability that could be, that could happen if you start to reduce your salt use. Next slide, please. And I think, is this where I'm turning it over to Aubrey?
I can talk about this if you want as well, whichever.
Sure, I'll let you jump in. So I'll turn it over to Aubrey Volker, who's our salt reduction coordinator extraordinaire. And I'll be back on for questions and answers or for other explanation. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ted. So yeah, so there's kind of two main things with in order for a person to gain this Green SnowPro certification. And we certify each individual person, not just the company, it's each employee within the company. So each employee is required to take certain amounts of coursework, which we've partnered with a lot of different organizations, SIMA, University of New Hampshire, Technology Transfer Center, the Smart About Salt Council up in Canada, who we partnered with pretty much in 2020 to start having online, all virtual coursework when we couldn't do any in-person classes. And once a person completes their training, then there is the second step of actually submitting the application, getting certified by New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, having that Green SnowPro certification. And it is an annual certification. Everyone has to renew it annually. It requires them to submit annual salt use reports, take refresher trainings every 2 years to make sure they're up to date on everything, all the best management practices and whatnot. And my screen stopped working. Oh, there we go. And once they, take the coursework, they submit their applications, they receive that Green SnowPro certification. This is then where they get that limited liability protection. So pretty much it states that commercial salt applicators who are certified by us, as well as the property owners and managers who hire them, are granted the limited liability protection against damages arising from snow and ice conditions. So this has become a big factor, not only with our private contractors getting certified, learning about the program, but as well as lots of business owners. You have store managers, condos, apartment complexes, all of those property owners are now seeing, hey, we can get that limited liability protection as well. And they are starting to require a lot of the companies that they're hiring for their, snow and ice maintenance in the winter to become certified in order to put in a bid and be contracted through them, which is really helping our program to grow. So I'll kind of go over a little bit of the current status, our current numbers, as well as some of our future goals, mostly goals we're hoping come up very recently. So we have seen substantial growth in the program since it really started with the limited liability in 2013. In 2013, there were 35 certificates issued. By last year in 2021, we had 166 brand new certifications. So that doesn't even include all the renewals that we've had. Obviously, there was a little bit of a slight decline in certifications, around 2020, whole COVID-19. And even now we're seeing a little decline in numbers just due to a lot of companies having some staffing issues, not being able to get in new employees to get certified. However, that being said, we do continue to see an increase in the number of companies having employees become Green SnowPro certified. So it is really great to see. Again, a lot of it has to do with just companies learning about the program, property owners and managers learning about the limited liability and requiring companies to get certified as well. And of course, one of the questions we are always getting is, so is salt reduction actually being achieved? Well, the answer, it is very complicated for a number of reasons. So what we did is we took a very small snapshot of the annual salt use reports that commercial Green SnowPro certified companies are required to submit annually. We took it from companies who have been with the program for at least 5 years, was about 231 annual salt use reports, averaged the salt use of pounds per square feet, compared that to the winter severity index, which is based on, temperature, snowfall, and number of air frost in the year, to kind of see, is there any significant salt use being decreased? Right now, what we're seeing, it's still pretty much the same throughout all these years. But again, there's many variables to consider when actually, looking at this data and going, hey, there's not much salt use decrease. What is happening? One is that data analysis could only be performed from a limited number of companies. One of our big issues we've had was actually submittal of annual salt use reports. At the beginning, we did have kind of an online way that everyone could submit it, and just had some technology issues that we were no longer able to use that online system. So now we're resorting all the way back to having everyone submit paper, hard documents, and just not, really having the bandwidth to go through all of those salt use reports and really see what's going on. So that's a major issue that we're in the process of trying to fix and be able to more efficiently look at salt use in the future. The winter severity index is not the only factor influencing salt application rates. There's specific weather conditions that require either more or less salt. There's been a huge increase, over in New England, and I believe in Midwest as well, with increase in freeze and thaw cycles. So we're having these beautiful, warm, sunny days in winter. All the snow is melting and then freezing overnight. So applicators have to go apply salt, even though there's no actual winter weather or precipitation that would show up on the winter severity index. And then, of course, I think we all know public perception and expectations play a huge role in salt application rates. There's definitely lots of myths of how salt works. Lots of people thinking they have to see the actual salt particles on the ground, otherwise it's not safe, it's icy. So that's where a lot of the oversalting comes into play. And what we were really curious about when we were kind of, looking at the salt use was, is there any kind of difference between northern and southern New Hampshire? Southern New Hampshire, much more urban, much more development. Northern New Hampshire, not quite as developed, but, they tend to think themselves like the hardy people, kind of, hey, if it's snowing, it's going to be icy, it's going to be slippery, God know what to expect. And we were actually really surprised by the drastic difference between North and Southern New Hampshire. We kind of split it right in the middle of the state, right around our lakes region, kind of see what we come up with. Again, this is very much a small snapshot of our salt use data, very observational. But it does help us to kind of decide, where do we need to focus a lot of our education and outreach? Where do we need to look towards first? And despite less severe winters in the South, salt use was consistently higher. Again, there is more development, hospitals and schools where, they're over applying just for safety concerns, but also makes us think about, is the level of service expectations higher in the Southern New Hampshire where there is more development, and how do we change those expectations? So kind of moving forward, with Green SnowPro, where we see all of this going, major one is Senate Bill 131 was recently approved, and it allows for municipalities to be eligible for Green SnowPro certification. So we already kind of have their first cut of the rules for the municipal Green SnowPro program currently being reviewed. We are hopeful to be implementing this program late 2023, early 2024. We have lots of towns and cities that are really excited to be a part of this program, to really show that they are doing, what's best for the environment, for their community. So we're very hopeful for that. Coursework, we definitely are seeing an increased need of people wanting different coursework, things that are a little more specific, more rounded. So this summer and fall, we'll be adding a few additional refresher course options for our Green SnowPro certificate holders that have not been available in the past, primarily through University of New Hampshire that we work with for that coursework. Smart About Salt Council just recently started offering their online courses in Spanish, which this just makes the course, more available and accessible to those who English is not their first language. And we definitely have talks about, what other, documentation, whether it's best the BMP manuals, the exams, just other information that we can get translated into other languages, so it is accessible for those whose first language is not English. And then again, as we always keep saying, the need for more outreach, need to alter some public perception, expectations, education on how salt works, education on, other best management practices such as salt brine, how that works, as well as expectations. Do you need to go to Walmart or the grocery store, whatever, at 10 o'clock during a blizzard? A lot of times people not wearing proper footwear like Crocs, that's just kind of asking to slip and fall and hurt yourself. Which kind of leads into the limited liability protection, which I will hand over to Steve to talk about.
Thank you, Aubrey and Ted. Great job as always. And for those of you that looked at the virtual flyer that was distributed by Allison, I just want to make sure everybody recognizes me because I didn't get the memo about putting on nice clothes for our bio shot. So I was a guy in the hard hat. So there you go. And thanks for the opportunity to speak today about a portion of our Green SnowPro program and arguably one of the most important elements to it. And what I would say right out of the gate is that the program was conceived of and formulated before 2013. However, it's important to remember this is a 100% voluntary program, and applications to become Green SnowPro certified in those first couple of years prior to the limited liability protection being offered was pretty meager. And the reason for that is, as Ted alluded to earlier, is that our commercial applicators were very leery about repeated slip and fall cases being brought forward against their companies, calling into question their practices. But also it was compounded not only by that, but the expectations of the management companies, the condos, the big box stores that hire them would often call them back on site to say, we can't see the rock salt. Our customers are complaining, we can't see it. We need you to come back and do a second application. And so in 2013, when the limited liability protection was afforded, it really boosted those certification numbers that Aubrey walked us through there. And this was really the key catalyst for that. And in New Hampshire, we poached the limited liability language from the New Hampshire ski industry because in New Hampshire, skiing really equates to scraping down a mountain that's very steep terrain. And, everybody has to sign that waiver when you arrive at the ski lodge that you're not going to hold the ski area, at fault for something you do, engaging in a high-speed downhill ice-covered mountain sport voluntarily. So we borrowed that concept from the New Hampshire ski industry and modeled our limited liability protection language right after that. And it's had mixed results, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today and give you a brief history of that. Next slide, Aubrey. Thank you. And just to sum it up, our Green SnowPro limited liability protection, as Aubrey mentioned in the previous slide, it extends not only to our salt applicators themselves, but the property owners and managers who hire them. And that's kind of a nice twofold umbrella of perceived protection against kind of the more bogus slip and fall claims that arise. And as Aubrey said, a lot of management companies now are bidding into their bid requests for winter snow and ice managers that they are Green SnowPro certified, so that they both enjoy this limited liability protection. Next slide. And until this past year in 2022, the slip and fall claims involving our Green SnowPro volunteer certified companies, the majority of them really resulted in quick withdrawals or settlements or summary judgment filings to avoid lengthy, costly trials. And a lot of it was due to lapses in record keeping in line with our RSA. And advance once there, Aubrey, please. And again, just a snippet from one of the claims that came through, really focused on, if you can see kind of midway through there, it talks about keeping those written records, and the company in this case really didn't keep their records together. They couldn't produce the documents in order to satisfy limited liability clause, and failure to do so resulted in them not being afforded the immunity under our statute. And we kind of got that message early on, and as Aubrey mentioned, she does a great job at outreach, and we really work with the community. Our annual New Hampshire Salt Symposium to get the word out. We had members from the legal community come in and talk about the importance of keeping good records. And it's a team effort. We do the certification and outreach, but the onus is on our volunteer commercial Green SnowPro applicators to keep their records in check and be able to produce them when they are brought into legal light. Next slide. And the following year in 2019, just a snippet from a case and a quote from an unnamed legal entity saying that he had a couple of other salt applications going on. And he said that he was representing a shopping center that hired one of our Green SnowPro certified applicators. And they ended up filing a summary judgment because, again, the record keeping just wasn't there to back it up and have a strong defense in this case. And then you can also see, the plaintiffs oftentimes are arguing that this whole immunity statute is unconstitutional. That might just be a New Hampshire thing because of where we are, but I don't know. And obviously the legal counsel agreed that was a long shot and we never saw that arise again, thankfully. Next slide, Aubrey. And then late last year, this is kind of the signature case that we wanted to bring up today to show that this was a situation that arose at a large condominium complex managed by one of our volunteer Green SnowPro winter contractors. And talking with Aubrey today, we really consider this firm to be our A+ Green SnowPro winter snow and ice management company. They've been with the program a long time, totally dialed in with record keeping. They have 2 New Hampshire Green SnowPro approved trainers, meaning that they train their staff annually themselves. They've met the requirements for us to say that, yeah, you are considered qualified to train your own staff. And this company has about 70 people that they certify annually with us. And rather than having people all over the map with their training, needing refresher course every 2 years, full course every 5 years, they just cut to the chase and train everyone every year with a full course and an exam. Just it simplifies the process, and then everybody is tight with training, orientation. They even have I forget what it is, like 100-person capacity training room on their facility. So this company is dialed in. And if a Green SnowPro course was going to go beyond a summary judgment filing to a full jury and trial case, this was the company not to pick if you were the plaintiff, but it was the company to pick if you're New Hampshire DES in the Green SnowPro program. And this was just a typical slip and fall claim. Person fell and injured themselves right outside their car up against a curb, just following a typical New Hampshire storm. And give me a mouse click there, Aubrey. And this ended up being a multiple day trial, 5 full days of trial, countless hours of both legal teams. Next mouse click, Aubrey. And again, this is the first time Green SnowPro limited liability was put in front of a full jury. Next click. And again, this company had their record keeping so well organized that really, I think we were very confident, as was their legal counsel, that wasn't going to be an issue. And after 5 days of testimony from both sides and legal teams, next click, Aubrey, the jury found the defendants, our Green SnowPro company, not liable in this case, and judgment was entered in their favor. And obviously they had the 10 days to file post-verdict pleadings, but we were pretty thrilled with this outcome. This is gonna help us educate the Green SnowPro community that, look, this company did things right, followed all the RSAs, and they got a favorable jury verdict in this case. Next click. And not more, I think 8 days later, the plaintiff filed their motion for judgment notwithstanding the verdict. So basically, they don't agree with the jury decision. They wanted the judge to make a decision on his own based on the quote unquote weight of evidence they saw. Next click. And it really was based around looking at our Green SnowPro best management practice manual and all the language in it. And they were claiming that this company didn't come out in the specified time to do anti-icing within the recommended hours pre-storm. Next click, Aubrey. They also were pushing that the company didn't follow all the best management practices that are published in the training manual. And we had to keep kind of reiterating through our testimony that it's impossible to follow all the BMPs, nor should you, because you should use the appropriate BMPs for the appropriate storm conditions at the appropriate time, et cetera, et cetera. Next click, Aubrey. And later that same day, the judge said, motion denied. That's ridiculous. The weight of evidence presented by the defendants was sound, and he did not overturn that verdict. So again, we were pretty excited about that. Next slide. And then more recently on January, the plaintiff filed a notice of mandatory appeal, which is still pending with a couple caveats. Click, Aubrey. The counsel representing the plaintiff in this case really was trying to get across to this person that there really are no grounds to pursue this this next appeal. And they were basically, you can just see basically saying there's no merit to pursuing this any further. It's a case that's locked down. Next click. And in addition to that, her counsel is now trying to, they were trying to educate her about the lack of merit on this. And they basically were saying that we really don't feel confident representing you anymore. And she indicated to them that she was in the process of seeking new counsel. Next slide. And to date, the plaintiff has not retained new counsel. Next click. And her counsel basically is refusing to represent her anymore under terms that she's been rendered unreasonably difficult, which doesn't come as a surprise to me being in the courtroom with them. And so we await now to see what the next steps will be, but it's looking like this is going to end well in our favor and act as an educational platform for us to educate not only other Green SnowPro companies interested in becoming Green SnowPro certified, but the New Hampshire legal system as well. We have to get this case law out, get the judges, the legal teams educated on this. Like, look, this stood up full trial, jury, multiple appeals, and it's still sound. And the bottom line is that as long as our Green SnowPro contractors have their records in check, they've got the training up to date, Aubrey checks them out, the limited liability should hold up as it did here just this past fall into this current year. So we're very excited about this precedent-setting case. Happy we could share it with you ahead of your legislative activities, and I'll turn the mic back over to our SALT coordinator, Aubrey.
All right. Thanks, Steve. And yeah, so just kind of with our Green SnowPro, our programmatic needs that we have seen moving forward, some of this just from the lessons we've learned in this past decade of the program being active, and with a lot of the limited liability, slip and fall claims. As Steve mentioned, kind of an improved best management practices manual. Really, we need one with, clearer language that can be updated a lot more efficiently. So when, we have the lawyers poking around saying, hey, company didn't do A, B, and C, we can be, well, no, they shouldn't have, and this is why. So just improving that. As I mentioned earlier, improving our SALT accounting system, since our kind of online system is no longer functional. We're back to hard paper copies, doesn't really allow us to actually look at this data and, analyze it at all. So we're in the process of doing that, as well as an online application system. Again, we're kind of still back in the Stone Ages of everyone sends in their paper applications. I go through them all. So being able to have an online application system be much more efficient and much easier for both the applicants and myself and everyone else on kind of our salt reduction staff having to go through and process all of our applications to get everyone certified for each winter season. Add accountability procedures, needing to find a way to make sure our Green SnowPro certified companies are actually doing what they're supposed to and not just saying they are, because it is a voluntary program. So we do want to make sure they are doing, best management practices and being able to hold them accountable. Again, additional training and outreach, trying to really broaden that, make it more well-rounded for all of our applicators. Finding a way to provide loans and grant opportunities for brine and other equipment that really aids in salt reduction for, because a lot of this equipment, there's a big cost associated with it, especially up front. So if there's a way we can provide certain grant opportunities for companies to be able to have access to that. Improve legislation to better address liability. Again, as we are having the municipality Green SnowPro program pass, it's giving us an opportunity to kind of tweak some of the language with our current commercial program and the rules with that. So just improving that language, making it much more clear. Outreach to legal and insurance communities. We've had some conversations with a few different insurance companies. Hopefully moving forward and in the near future, we'll be able to kind of partner with them. Maybe some of these insurance companies will provide better rates for their clients that do have the Green SnowPro certification. And then development of marketing materials for our Green SnowPro companies, just ways that they can better share, what they're doing, what it means for them to be Green SnowPro, and just try to make it, easier and better for them in whatever way we can. So I will probably open it up to questions now. And, if we don't have time to get through all of them, or if you think of any questions, comments after this, definitely feel free to reach out to any of us. We are happy to talk about this at any time.
Awesome, Aubrey. And if you can end the screen share there, we'll all pop back on. Great. Thank you so much. This was really incredible. And we already have some questions coming in here. So, and just a reminder, anybody who's joining in right now, you can type questions into the chat, or you can email me at wisaltwise@gmail.com. So I did have couple questions come in over email. The first one was, how did you get those numbers on private salt use? So, and that's a question I have too. So I think they were both, you had the initial table showing that salt use on the private side dwarfed use by your DOT and municipalities. And then you also had the pie chart too that showed the percentage of parking lot salt compared to other chloride sources. So if you can dive into that a little bit, that'd be great.
Sure, I can start. Steve, you can jump in later if you want. But just basically, the way that we did that was, some of its estimates. We had really good numbers for DOT. So our Department of Transportation, we had very good salt data. We had really good chloride data. So we kind of knew the mass of salt that were in these watersheds. We could take the amount of salt the DOT was putting down, and then we understood very clearly how much the municipalities were putting down on the private roads. We could come up with average lane miles of salt usage. And then we used a lot of the published information on private sector salt use. Put all of that in, and then tried to make sure that the balance worked. We also had a few percentages for salt water softeners. A few other things that we don't have water. We have generally soft water here, not like in the Midwest where you have hard water. So we don't have a lot of soft water softener use. It's increasing weirdly, but anyway, that's how they came up with that, was basically coming up with a per lane mile usage for the municipalities and the DOT. Some published numbers for the private side, and then making sure that it all actually worked in the mass balance, plus or minus 20%. So those numbers are as good as they get for sort of TMDL kind of related purposes.
Okay, so I guess I'm hearing you had the state numbers; those are solid. You were
Right.
able to pull and come up with pretty good estimates for the municipal numbers.
Right.
I guess the published kind of what's done on the private side, because we've had a hard time. I know,
Sure.
We're seeing Wisconsin getting numbers from the private side. It sounds like now, even though you're requesting those numbers to be shared, there's still a question about the accuracy of that. I guess I'm wondering if it potentially is going to skew higher on the private side if we're trying to, if that's the black box. And we're saying if we want these numbers to match out, the additional chlorides coming from them versus what you had discussed earlier, all of that historical kind of like the legacy chlorides, right? I guess chlorides are moving through more quickly than sodium in the soil, but just
Well,
the idea that you've got
yeah,
some buildup there, right?
again, there's lots of assumptions. There's assumptions on top of
Mhm.
assumptions here, that
Yeah.
which is that you're making some assumptions about how all the salt is getting there.
Mhm.
So, essentially this is a simple model. It's a straight pipe model. You're basically, you're not taking that into consideration. And maybe that's okay, because if you assume that all of the sources are more or less, either open drainage, or a lot of that salt ends up, directly into the waterway. We know that it's coming through eventually. Does it really matter whether it came in 1 year versus another
Yeah.
year? That you're sort of adding all of that together to come up with a number. And and I think, again, it calibrated pretty well. And I think it jives pretty well
Mhm.
with reality as you start to look, because even if you just look at the amount of, just from a GIS perspective, of paved area, even if you just used paved area and assumed everybody was using the same everywhere, which is not true, we all
Mhm.
know. But even if you did, you can come up with some percentages. And then the question is if you have real data to test that against,
Yeah.
then you
Which
calibrate your model.
You now do, right? You now do, or
We're starting to, yeah.
yeah. No.
So, I think this is a conversation that's been going
Mhm.
a long time on this, in what I call the salt reduction community,
Mhm.
which is understanding salt rates and appropriate salt rates. So published salt rates, what do we have? Phil Sexton did his master's degree, looked at those various different salt, application recommendations.
Mhm.
It's a very challenging, it's a challenging scientific question.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you for digging into that a little bit more. There's also a question about, so the salt use reports, those are annual reports. If a company is not providing that data, it sounds like they wouldn't necessarily be eligible for licensure the coming year. Is that just asking for salt use and total square footage?
Yeah, so our annual salt use reports, those are required to be submitted annually. If a company does not submit it, then they do not get to renew their Green SnowPro certification. So very important for them to do so. And yes, it asks for what towns they've applied salt in, what kind of material as well, if they're using anything just besides normal rock salt. And then the amount per square foot, whether that's, pounds, tons, whatever they prefer. And then they do have their own other record keeping they need to keep as well, with application rates and whatnot, but that is not required to be submitted.
They're not submitting
Just
that.
kind of the total amounts that they use.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it definitely came out, I think, Steve, really clearly in your presentation, the importance of that record keeping. Even though they're granted the liability, they still have to provide those records to kind of back that up. All right, another question here came in on the chat from John. What is the amount reduction in salt use that you see? Which I think you kind of alluded to, actually more than alluded to. You shared with us that you don't necessarily see a reduction in salt per square foot, right?
Right. I mean, again, with that very small snapshot of, salt use reports we looked at, we aren't really seeing much. But again, with both issues of just actually looking at all of our annual salt use reports, since our online system is no longer functional, and just having the hard copies, along with just kind of all the other factors at play besides just, weather and what kind of weather, really does make a huge difference. So yeah, we don't really have a good answer right now.
And I mean,
I was going to just add to that, anecdotally, when we meet with our Green SnowPro audience, commercial applicators, this is all about business, right? And we're all in, we collectively are in it for the environmental benefits, because we've got this skyrocketing chloride issue going on in our surface waters and groundwaters. But these firms, that might not be their big thing, but what they come back to us with is like, okay, I got Green SnowPro certified 2 years ago, and over those 2 years, I've saved so much money because I'm calibrating. I switched to brine, and I've put down 40% less salt. And of course, well, what kind of winter was that? There's many variables, but in general, a lot of these guys and gals that operate plows and sanders are like, I saved enough over the last 2 years to buy a brine truck, and it means, I can't give you a number, but it's like we're putting down less salt because we're not missing our calibrations, and we're being much smarter and doing the BMP. So it's encouraging, but it's not quantitative.
Yeah, and I think the biggest piece there is you don't have the before, right? You only are tracking numbers after they've gotten certified, right? So if you would have the previous 5 winters, right? And then you're comparing that to the 5 winters after they get certified.
That would be ideal. Yeah.
A different story. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. I just clicked out of the wrong button here. Okay, we've got a question that has come in from Casey in the chat. Are the municipalities currently required to track in a similar manner, or is this over and above what municipalities currently do? And is the state self-reporting?
I think one thing, the only place where towns are reporting are the MS4 communities. So one interesting thing about New Hampshire, amongst many interesting things, is that we are non-delegated for NPDES authority. So the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Systems, we don't write our own NPDES permits in New Hampshire. EPA writes those permits. There's only 3 states in the nation that is the case: Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and New Mexico. So EPA writes our MS4 permits, and they've been writing them to accommodate basically a sort of Green SnowPro-esque approach. And so they require a number of things. One of those is reporting. And so we will be working with EPA on the next permit, which is being written next year, to further refine what those communities, and that's 44 of the most probably densely populated communities in the state. It's really the southern and southeastern tier in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
So that covers that. And then as far as the state goes, they willingly give us their data. We ask for it every year. We send an email over, hey, you got that salt data? And they say, sure. And they send it to us, and they send that by shed. So that's the way it shows up to us.
By salt shed.
By salt shed. So that's how we get their data. And you can see that for the salt sheds that have brine, which isn't all of them, but for the ones that are using brine, you generally see a more level amount of salt use per year.
And I would add, I don't know where Casey is tuning in from, but in Wisconsin, the DOT does a lot of tracking of salt use because they spend millions of dollars, right, on salt, and they want to use that materially efficiently. So we've got in Wisconsin great numbers from the state DOTs, and then the DNR does require MS4s, so that'd be municipalities that have separate stormwater and sanitary sewers. So if you've got a sewer, like a storm drain, right, and any snow melt that goes through that would have a direct conduit to a stream, those municipalities need to be tracking and reporting their salt use. And that's also true of our counties as well, who maintain in Wisconsin both county and state highways. So we do have good numbers in Wisconsin for salt use from municipalities, counties, and the state highway system. But like I alluded to earlier, not really on the private side. So another question, I think, Aubrey, you mentioned that there was a lot of training and then later on mentioned an exam. So is that exam administered by whichever organization an individual might go through for their training?
Yes. So we have, through Smart About Salt, University of New Hampshire, but all the exams are very similar. We do have it, in our legislative rules, what it has to cover, so kind of coming up with different application rates, all different kinds of questions, situational questions. So some of them do vary slightly, but they all are very similar. And for, any organization or any of our approved trainers, to have an approved, training or course, they do have to submit, kind of a approved course application to us at DES that explains, what they're going to go through, what they're going to teach, a copy of the exam that they're going to administer. So they do need to get that approved by us. So we are able to make sure that, everything is being covered.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came in here over email was trying to understand who is the certification authority. So is that New Hampshire DES? What program within DES does the certification lie? And do you hire employees to manage the program? I think we're looking at one of them. So are you the certifying authority? What program is this certification program within? And then I think Aubrey, you're the manager, right?
Yeah, I pretty much coordinate, along with help of a lot of my other staff, including Steve and Ted. But yeah, I'm the salt reduction program coordinator, kind of manage, all the applications that come in, coordinate with everyone. And mine is only a part-time position. Definitely one of our lessons learned is we need more staff to much better, do things more efficiently, be able to look at our annual salt use reports, be able to have some sort of accountability for our current Green SnowPro certified companies. So yeah, if you're gonna introduce a similar program, definitely have probably a little more staffing is definitely what we've realized. But lots of help from all of my colleagues, very much appreciated.
And the program does lie within the New Hampshire DES Water Division, of which Ted is our assistant water division director, and then it's in the Watershed Management Bureau, and then it's nested in a watershed assistance section. The key term being water and watershed. And our Watershed Management Bureau also has our water quality section, our data management section, our biology section. So it's well situated to have cross-program networking and resources available. But as Aubrey said, we really would like to have a full-time Aubrey, but right now it's a fee-based program based on certification fees. So it really merits a full-time position in the future.
And the program is actually out of our 319 program. So if you're sort of thinking, where does this sit within our federal funding and our federal programs, it's within the 319 program.
Thank you. Yes, and this was your neighbor to the south, someone from Massachusetts, who asked about that. So maybe Heidi will get back to you if she's got any follow-up. She's not too far away. The last question I'd like to squeeze in, I know we've reached our hours. I understand Steve or Ted, Aubrey, one of you has to pop off, but maybe one could stick around to answer this, was about the statute of limitations. So just with this lawsuit that's been going on over the course of a few years, with this appeal, like what is there I know in Wisconsin we have 3 years for statute of limitations. I guess it's already kind of gone through the process once, so maybe that restarts, or I don't know.
That's a great question, Ted. You want to?
My understanding is that the statute of limitations on a slip and fall case is 3 years.
Okay.
And so, you would have 3 years from the point of the incident in order to bring a lawsuit.
Try that case.
Once you're in the process, though, it takes as long as it takes. So there's no time frame then set for how long it can take to get through the appeals process.
Okay.
Theoretically, this case that we just went through, which we hope is going to stick, that theoretically, if that did get appealed, it would go to the appeals, court. Eventually, it would go to the Supreme Court. So it could go all the way through that Supreme Court process. Again, theoretically, that could be another year, but there's no limitation on how long it takes once you're in that process.
Once we got the door open. Okay, got it.
Yep.
Well, I'm crossing my fingers for you here. Some precedent on this would be amazing. So I will cut it off here. So my apologies if you have folks with more questions. You can send them to me, or just go back to where Aubrey had those slides up with the team's emails. But thank you so much for joining in today and sharing all that you've learned throughout this journey. And yeah, we will continue to send you all the best as we work through this little, I don't want to say hiccup, but this trial, if there is an appeal. And yeah, thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Allison. I really appreciate it. I just want to point out that we think that Saltwise is doing some amazing work.
Mhm.
We may have a couple of things that we're doing, but we don't know every damn thing. And what we're doing is we're learning from you all as you do fantastic things in your own state. So please keep it up and share with us the great things you're doing.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, I've
happy to
definitely
do
stolen a lot of your material to share with our applicators and communities here in New Hampshire.
Oh, we even stole Aubrey from your state, so.
That's
you
true.
know,
That is true.
There we go.
I was already in New Hampshire at least, but
Technically.
All right. Well, be well, all of you. Take care.
thank you.
Thank you very much.